Teasara, so good to have you here. Really, really appreciate the time. And I think we're going to have a great conversation today. Where we always start is with our guests talking a little bit about their journey and how they got here today. So we'd love to hear about that from you.
Awesome. Nice to have me joining today. So, my name is Teasara Thompson. Currently, I sit as the Senior Director of Technology Partnerships at Sigma Computing. We are an analytics platform, but I also like to dig into how I got to where I am today because I feel like it's a non traditional background that led me to partnerships. And if I look back at myself back in college, never would I have thought I would have gone this path. But I think the different choices that I made throughout that journey really opened the doors and allowed me to find my niche, which I think is partnerships. So, not to go back to the beginning, but I actually got my undergrad degree in kinesiology and sports management, rolled out of college, and found myself in insurance. I am born and raised in the Bay Area and still live here. So, a bit of a unicorn, and I had a friend that was like, "Why don't you work in tech? Like, you should really be. There's all these people coming in, and there's all the jobs and opportunities. You should really take an advantage of that." And my appetite for wanting to be more sales focused led me to pivoting into my first technology role. And starting off from the bare bones from an SDR. So, working at Couchbase as a SDR, not knowing what a database is, with no SQL, JSON, all those things were learned. And I think that was the core of really what led me to today is not necessarily like you have to know everything, but always have that capacity to be open to learning. Um, and that's kind of what brought me to reaching up kind of the different levels and starting as an SDR, moving companies, helping build out SDR organizations, eventually moving into a closing role. So becoming a seller at Mesosphere, which is now D2IQ, and then also at Fauna, helping lead out their teams on the corporate side and overseeing an outsourced SDR team. But where I kind of hung up uh, my seller job responsibilities was when I was at AWS. And then that actually being in that role is what opened my eyes to partnerships and the capacity of how impactful they are to your business. Stepping into an organization as an AWS seller and knowing that if you think about today, 100, 200 plus native services that AWS has. And as a seller, I'm responsible for understanding the full stack of my customers, understanding how I can help them from various different vantage points. If you think about AI ML, from their storage, from their compute, um, I want to say that I'm always learning, but I'm not going to know it all. And the only way to fill those gaps was with partners. So AWS has a very strong and mature partner program. And through those relationships, it really opened my eyes to how I can expand my business and really have a grasp upon how I can uh, deliver to my customers, provide them a better experience. And in the age of the best product and the right solution for the right use case, you definitely want to look out to those third party ISVs or native services in order to build a comprehensible stack that meets the needs of the business. So that's really what opened my eyes, which opened the door for the opportunity to not jump too far, which I then went to Redis and I oversaw their global relationship with AWS. So leveraging my last contacts when I was in the seller role to say, how do I then pivot and look at what are the types of activities, programs, events that I can produce that then generate some activity that will ultimately produce pipeline and close won opportunities. Um, and then after Redis, that led me to me joining Sigma and basically building out their technology partnership arm. So it's been an exciting journey. And that's why I say coming from a non-traditional background and making those specific decisions that open my eyes to different areas of the business. I'm a big proponent of not only just finding out the things that you like, but also understanding the things that you don't like, because that can guide you on the path to say, when I make that next move, this makes sense for me. And this is where I'm going to be able to grow Professionally, it's an area that I'll be challenged as an individual. It's an area that I enjoy coming to work and producing for the organization that I work for. So that's the long story short of how I got to Sigma today.
Amazing, amazing. And it looks like you spent a bit of time in Korea as well, by the looks of it. Is that right?
Yeah, so I like to travel. I want to thank my teacher when I was in high school. My first trip out of the country was to Costa Rica and had a little bit of a bug. So when I was in my MBA program at St. Mary's College of California, I actually had a chance to do kind of a exchange where I went to KAIST, which is a university out in Korea, and spent some time going through their business program. So kind of just giving you that global perspective and understanding that based upon different cultures and different needs, focus areas, business is done. And that just kind of opened my eyes to having a baseline outside of just, hey, you're out in the world and kind of focusing on these things, but you're engaging with different people and different needs and wants. So it was a
Yeah.
really cool experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got to do a decent amount of business in Korea when I was working at Amplitude, and it was so much fun. It's like the business practices are quite different. There's a lot of overlap, but also there's a lot of things that are quite different, and it's really fun going and doing that. It's like having to relearn how to do your job.
I
It's a
wonder how
blast.
much, Korean barbecue you had in the late hours. Definitely, if your boss goes out at night, you're going out with them. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
it was a good time.
Yeah, that definitely happened. Like, and just loads of barbecue pork belly because obviously pork belly, I guess, is like a really nice ththing to order there. For us, it's like the bulgogi or beef or whatever is like super good, but like it's kind of like a show off thing to order a bunch of pork belly, I guess. And so like I don't think I've ever been more sick of pork belly in my life, because I don't even like pork belly at the best of times, let alone when you're eating it nonstop for a week. But obviously you can't say no. Also, but yeah, had some amazing times there. Drank a lot of beer and a lot of soju,
So
and
true.
had a great time. So uh, I would love to start by just talking about. I agree with you that like starting as an SDR and like doing the repetitions and figuring stuff out is like such a phenomenal way to start your career. And like if you can kind of keep that beginner's mind mentality, like you're going to be set up for success in the rest of your career. I think I can agree more with you. Like I would love to talk about your like some of those key skills that you learned in those early days of doing sales that you found that have like persisted through your partnerships career to where you are today. And like so looking back now, what have you found has been like particularly helpful?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question. I believe it's like the foundational things, the same core tenets that I was learning when I was a SDR back in the day, or things that I do today in my job in just in a different way. It shows up. So thinking about as an SDR, you have to be almost like you have to be resilient. You're smiling and dialing. You're working and trying to get in front of individuals, and you're basically selling a product. Today, as I sit in partnerships, when I think about my customers are my internal sales and SE organization, and then my partner's sales and
Mm-hmm.
SE organization. So I'm constantly being an advocate and also being that evangelist to get them up to speed on the latest and greatest. So it's the same way when I was an SDR. How am I properly communicating the value? What's in it for them? Why should they be engaging with us, taking these meetings, doing these events with us, partnering in this capacity? Why should their reps be giving us opportunities through partner referrals? Though that core tenet is still something that I use today.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe as a seller, and I was having this with an individual on my team the other day, we were talking about a conversation. You go into a call and you have kind of your proof of value requirements. So, like, if I do X, Y, and Z and I prove out this use case, then if we follow this process, then that means you'll ultimately buy the product. Um, the goal as a seller is to walk the customer through a path and understand how they buy. The same thing happens on the partnership side today. When I'm on calls, I start off my calls with here's what the objectives are and the things I want to achieve. I'll walk through those and then next steps at the end of the call. How are we closing this out? How are we moving the ball forward? So, really keeping that closing, always be closing mentality is something that I will continue to use throughout my career. So I would say that's another core tenet. And then another area is like, no doesn't mean no. It
Hmm.
might just mean no right now. And no might not, a yes might come from somebody else. Um, there's a book called like Go for No.
Hmm.
So really trying to look out for that way because that's a clear, definitive answer, and you know how to pivot and navigate from there. Um, as an SDR, as a seller, you're constantly hearing no, not right now. Talk to me in 3 quarters. I work with partners now where it's amazing. I've been at Sigma now for about 14 months or so. And at the beginning, when I started, it was like chasing partners, work with us. How can we integrate? And we weren't getting the time of day at that point in time. Fast forward to today, and I have a list of partners that are like, we want to build to you. What do your APIs look like? How can we best go to market with you? And so, kind of that how those tables shift in
Hmm.
terms of being able to define and say, like, it doesn't mean no right now, and how you can like focus on that path forward. I think those are skills that I use every day. So, in any capacity, having that strong foundational core, whatever level you go up to, it's like using that as your kind of jump off layer to continue to build upon that in order to develop in your career.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And I know that we get a lot of folks in the sales space, or also people like transitioning into partnerships, or at least like really interested in it. I know that every role I've ever worked in, when I've been in a partnerships role, I've had people from the sales team that are pretty interested in moving over. It seems like a nice job. I think the grass is greener, always greener on the other side, right? It's not as easy as it seems. But like, what tips would you have for salespeople that are either looking to transition into partnerships or maybe have recently moved over into a partnerships role?
I am a big person that points to like first thing you should do is like sit down with the folks from your partner team. Like informational like interviews in any capacity will give you like a good view into maybe what you're just seeing at surface level because um I've seen it in places where a lot of people are like partnership people like throw events and it's a fun job and like that's all they do, but they don't really understand kind of the weight that goes behind being in partnerships because I feel like in some ways as a partner leader, alliance manager, anything like that, like I physically can't build an integration. I am not the one out there writing the marketing material. Like, I dabble, but Lord knows that's not what I should be focusing on. There's a whole organization, business unit that does that. So I'm always driving an agenda through different orgs in order to meet my goal in the partnership or org. So the types of things that I say is like go talk to people within your company or people at other companies that you may know of. Um, that whole component of like go for no, people want to
Hmm.
help. So even if you reach out to somebody that you have no relationship, but you're interested in their company, kind of their background, like I say, go do that. um, I'd also say is to understand kind of the different components that work together. So, as a person in a sales seat, you're the CEO of your business. You're basically understanding like how am I leveraging marketing to get in front of the right customers that I want to talk to? How am I working with my sales ops team to make sure my Salesforce data is up to date and I can be able to target, have good listings of that nature. The same thing happens in partnerships. So I would say kind of understand where that overlap is and how you can use those skills. And then the last thing I would say is like take a second and be like, am I leveraging partners? How am I doing in this current role as a seller? And how could I improve upon that? Because then that gives you an idea of what does the partner organization do for me or help me with to help me reach my number? Which I think that actually coming from a sales background, you have that sales DNA. So when I'm thinking about things in a partner role, I actually can think about, okay, sales reps have to focus on like their territory plan. They have to focus on having certain number of calls that convert. How are those in their each stages? So that helps me then identify different programs, activities that I can build out to best meet and serve their business to lead to that pipe gen that I'm ultimately aiming for. So those are the couple things that I
Yeah.
would focus on initially.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Super, super actionable. I was like, okay, this is like a we can make a list out of this and we can like give it to people as a playbook. I absolutely love it. So you were talking about during your time at AWS. Obviously, there's a huge suite of tools that AWS offers, and then also in addition to that, there's an even more huge ecosystem of tech and service providers and everything else. And so, at first I'm just interested in like how do you stay up to date on that kind of stuff? It realistically, like even just the offerings that AWS has, not including the partners, like how are you meant to know and how are you meant to bring those up with customers or prospects?
Yeah, even though you're more of a generalist seller, and of
Hmm.
course at AWS, there's a large range of different folks that focus on specific things, which is a part of kind of being that business owner. So I'm a journalist, but that doesn't mean I know every nitty gritty detail of how each specific technology works or how that integrates. At AWS, they do when you start, they have you take at least their first initial course, so you have to
Hmm.
pass that. So that gives you the baseline. Think of their core services like EC2, S3, things of that nature, and an extension beyond that as well. So you have that core foundation of like if I am um, Sally or Joe coming off the street and I swipe my credit card and I want to get started on AWS, what are the core things that I would need to build out my stack? But being a business owner at AWS as well, there's specialized sellers that focus on specific areas. So if I really was engaged with a customer that was like, hey, I have these initiatives where I'm trying to look into how AIML can really benefit my business. Of course, I could speak to SageMaker and kind of all the spinoffs of that product that exist there. But there are individuals or product teams that own that. So, hey, on our next call, let me loop these folks in. We can have a wired out conversation about what you're trying to achieve. So then we can define kind of what those next steps are. From a partnership angle, I would say the initial touch points is like when you're talking to prospects or customers, it's just a lot of discovery. Like, what are you
Hmm.
using today? How is that working out for you? So you start to hear
Mm.
these prospects, customers talk about, oh, I may be using this AWS native tool, but I have all these ISVs that I'm leveraging as well, and this is how my stack is built. From there, then you have the ability to reach out to these partners, get some more insight around there, and then AWS reps are incentivized to leverage the AWS marketplace. So that's an area that you would kind of lean into and say, hey, I really want to think about how is this can be bundled up together
Yeah.
for a cloud commit. And so really thinking about how partners aren't just driving your consumption as in I'm selling this particular native service, but what is the downstream consumption? What is the marketplace benefits for the customer, having everything in one place. So you're kind of thinking of all these components that can ultimately, at the end of the day, not to use a AWS leadership principle, but just customer obsession, just really
Hmm.
thinking about what's the best situation that I could set up for them in order them to have like a wonderful experience on the platform.
I love that because not only is that the best experience for the customer, but it is actually the most simple approach for the salesperson as well, right? It's like, okay, let's start with the challenges that they have, and then we probably have a solution for it between our own products or what's in the marketplace. That's like it's incredibly simple, but it's also like so smart. I absolutely love that. It's so smart. And so like you mentioned the marketplace, and before you were mentioning other kind of ISVs and service provider partners. Like, how does it work with people becoming like? How does someone become a partner that people notice, or like how would someone get in your realm of recognition, I guess, because I can imagine in the marketplace there's a huge amount of tools and service providers and everything else, and like you probably have a choice of 10, 50, 100 for every single thing that someone might have a problem with. So like how does someone get up on the list or like capture your attention?
I would say, I guess I want to make sure I'm answering this question correctly. Like, my intention as a sales rep or
Yeah,
like a customer.
as a sales rep, yeah, it definitely as a sales rep. So like you're having a call with a prospect or an existing customer that you're looking to upsell, and you've identified a need in that discovery that you were doing, and now your next step is like, hey, okay, like I want to find something that solves this problem. Is there like a preferred partners list or like a ranking or a filtering, or like do you just go and search in the marketplace for things that solve that problem? I'm interested like how you connect the dots on something like that.
Yeah, happy to answer that question. So, first things first, the low hanging fruit is if the prospect or customer tells you, "Hey, we're looking at these technologies," so
Okay.
that gives you a north star. So that's
Yeah.
the easiest solution. The other way, if I'm thinking about, okay, you have this problem, this is the use case. Um, as an AWS rep specifically, the native services is what I default on because in terms of like compensation, that's where I'm going to get comped the most. So just kind of looking to, as I said, those specialized sellers, to loop them in to get a better understanding and basically scope out and get those requirements there. If for some reason there's like, this isn't meeting our needs, what other things can we look at? Like in that perspective, like a true sales rep, like you're being consultant. How can I help you find the best solution? And it's not like I go through and I search all through marketplace. AWS is large, so you have partner managers. You have people that have quotas associated with leveraging specific partners. So there is a tiering out program in terms of like what are your go-to partners, and there's specific criteria that gets those partners to that specific level. So it's leveraging those resources to say, hey, I have a customer that's looking in this particular space. Let's say it's BI analytics, and I really want to know like what's the top tier partner that we work with, and who should we recommend. So that becomes like a short list
Mm.
that you then can pull from and say, okay, you can talk to these people, or like an AWS rep, what they would do is like create an opportunity that gets pushed into their deal reg, which is ACE, that notifies a third party ISV that this opportunity. They get on the phone and kind of walk through what's going on in the particular deal, and to see if it's good to kind of make that introduction to the prospect or customer to say, um, let's flesh this out a little bit more. And then you have subject matter experts in that area that can really advocate and flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome, and that helps a ton. And I another thing I'm interested in. So I've participated in the ACE program when
Hmm.
I was at Amplitude, and actually Justin Forth from the community, who runs a great company now, kind of helping people navigate these partner programs. He was my partner manager at AWS on the other side, and so he did a great job of doing what you're describing and kind of helping us navigate the program. I guess one question I had for you is like, so that kind of describes when a customer has a problem and you can solve it with a partner solution. Like one of the other things you kind of mentioned is the deal reg, and that obviously works both ways, right? Like someone can
Hmm.
also like as a partner, I could come in and register like an opportunity for AWS, and then I would get potentially an AWS salesperson to support me on that deal. Did you ever work any of those kinds of situations where like you got something from a partner rather than the other way around? And I would love to hear if you did on like what's what can a partner do in that sense to set that conversation up for success as well?
Yeah, and it's actually funny because as an AWS seller, I think the inflow of partners reaching out to you is at a higher quantity than you reaching
Sure.
out to a partner because they're selling something that's usually very specialized. So when they do put something in ACE and register that, like they're focused on something where I may be in that account and I may be talking totally to the infrastructure team and working out what their consumption looks like over here. So come in a BI partner, it's kind of like, oh, like that's interesting. So that's when I kind of explained at the beginning of the call as to why working at AWS really opened my eyes to how like partnerships gave me that full scope and view into my customers because they would notify me of different areas that maybe because I'm so focused on this particular area because bandwidth and you're juggling multiple accounts that they could say here's additional projects that are going on and I don't necessarily have to lead that. I can have the third party ISV lead that, and I could support through my relationship I have with the prospect or customer in order to execute on that deal. Um, and so, to answer the other part of your question, is more or less of how a partner kind of gets in front of a rep and makes themselves more noticeable is adding more opportunities to ACE.
Mhm.
There is I wouldn't say a set quota, but AWS wants ISVs to continuously be adding opportunities and putting that on their reps' radar. In addition, something they want you to do is be in marketplace. So, giving their customers the ability to still procure through the AWS marketplace and have that unified bill. Um, and then, in addition, like doubling down on like what your go to market is like how are we working with your marketing team? Are you doing dev days? Are you sponsoring summits, things of that nature? So, through those activities and in addition, the consumption that you're driving through AWS being used as a platform, those are things that kind of move you up the tiers and get you more noticeable. So, you would probably discuss that with your partner manager at the beginning of the year to define what is my business plan with AWS and how are we going to progress things forward through kind of those specific channels.
Yeah, I love that. Super interesting. And then like you shift gears to working at Redis and now you're on the other side of the spectrum, right? Like and you're now managing the relationship with AWS, which I'm sure a lot of people do. It's like where better to get your AWS partner rep than from AWS. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about, obviously we touched on it a little bit, but like with that framing now, like what was your approach at Redis to partnering with AWS? Like, and I guess to start with, like, what does success look like in a partnership with AWS? Because I think everyone looks at AWS and they say, hey, they have so many customers. Like, I'm sure they could refer me a ton of business or whatever. Having worked on the inside, like, what was your KPIs when you were going into that partnership with AWS, and how did you approach it there?
Yeah, I think to speak about Redis and what's interesting about Redis is an added layer of complexity is what AWS does really well is they have those 200 plus services
Hmm.
but they have services that obviously have been built off of open source. So
Yeah.
Redis is actually an open source technology, and Redis prioritized their actual enterprise version. AWS has their own version called Elasticache. So you have to think about it in the same way that people are when I was talking about as an AWS rep, my default initially is to go to the native services. So in this case, that would be Elasticache
Hmm.
and then go to partner. So, what success would look like, I was measured on basically deployments on AWS. Redis, we had a large on prem presence, and our presence on AWS was like the second largest in terms of the other cloud providers. So,
Hmm.
really looking to grow and develop the number of our customers that were running Redis on top of AWS. And that was done through a multitude of ways. AWS, like I said, has a bunch of mature programs that they focus on to incentivize not only partners, but their sellers to kind of create this very tactical way of growing the relationship because AWS recognized that we can only get so big.
Yeah.
And we know that other organizations are going to use third parties. So, what's the best way is to find a way to loop them in and bring them in and bundle them up.
Hmm.
Think about the EDPs that AWS has, those enterprise discount program where you commit to something and receive a discount. So, how many deals were we pushing through Marketplace was another KPI. So, I launched Redis on the AWS Marketplace. Definitely was, I thank all the individuals that helped me in that process because um, we didn't go the traditional route, but once we did, we saw a huge uptick of being able to speak to what the value of Marketplace is. And I really appreciate the folks, I'll throw a shout out that are kind of spearheading a lot of thought leadership around this, like tackle.io, to
Hmm.
really talk about how the change and how people are buying and procuring software today. So, looking to say, what existing budgets do you have? How can we tap into those? Especially think of year end. We've already committed to this. What do we have to spend? A renewal. I don't have budget within my particular business unit, but I do have budget as the wider commit that I have with AWS. So, kind of looking for those ways. The additional programs, they have migration programs that you can be a part of. So, success for me was also measured by how I was not only getting into these programs, but also how was I implementing them and how were they being executed across? So, how many migrations were we a part of? Different things in terms of putting opportunities into ACE and making sure that our reps are having those conversations about key deals. Like, by no means do we want to say, like, if there is a competitive play between Redis and Elasticache, I like to address the elephant in the room.
Hmm.
And as an AWS rep, like I said, what is best for the customer? If I get a Redis rep and AWS rep on a phone, and they're saying these are the things that we solve, the things that maybe your native services doesn't solve all of them the way the customer is looking for, I'm going to advocate for the ISV to be leveraged because that's going to provide a better experience. And at the end of the day, like, I'd rather do something now thinking about the long term. They have a better experience. Who's to say they'll have cost savings that then can be reinvested in other areas, or they'll look to grow on the platform or commit to an EDP. So those are the types of things that I really focused on in terms of what the success of the partnership was. And I like to say, when I was at Redis, something that we would have done a lot more but could not because it was during the pandemic would be more in person and events.
Hmm.
So, obviously, looked at virtually supporting reInvent and summits and things of that nature. So, making sure when people think about AWS and the best way to run Redis is on AWS. So, continuing to tell that messaging out there because, as we know today, prospects and customers are doing their research and they know more about you than they used to in the past. And so when they get to that final point, when they want to have that conversation, they've been given enough information for them to be in a good place where you're not backtracking, but you're more progressing the conversation forward. So those are the things I focus on as I transitioned over from a seller to into a more partner focused role.
Yeah, amazing. It's super, super useful insights there. I absolutely love it. And so you started your own community as someone who also kind of started and runs a community as well. I think like one of the things that I found really pleasant about running a community is it I kind of flex a lot of the same skills that I do in my day job in partnerships. And fortunately for me as well, and I'm sure you ran into the same, like the two are very complementary. Like I'm learning from all of the people in the community. Like this conversation right now is like incredibly valuable for my day job, and I'm learning a
Mhm.
ton from you right now, and I do that actively through the community, and so it's like a very complementary. I would love to just hear a little bit about that from you and your like the community, and like how that potentially like supported what you were doing from a partnerships perspective as well.
Yeah, so I actually, this is something I had thought about when I first pivoted into tech as an SDR. As a Black woman in the Bay Area, um, I can say I looked around when I joined the organization. There wasn't many people that looked like me.
Hmm.
Um, and that doesn't mean by no means like we don't exist. But it also, I just wanted folks to know like they don't have to feel so isolated. So the community that I started was really initially just centered around just like casual conversations with people that I had come across in the industry, and just saying like, what have your experience have been? It didn't even have to be related to like your specific job, but just like, how am I progressing in my career? What things should I be focusing on? What books should I reading? Just general things. So many roundtables and gatherings that happened from there. And that grew to a larger group of folks of just like emails and just information being disseminated. And it really like opened my eyes and gave me a lot of like energy around, hey, here's this person who thought they would never be in this role because they didn't know it existed. So, one, I want to educate and let people know this is a career path that is open to them, to give them, success within their career, be financially stable, which is very important to me and my community, and then also just give you a path outside of, you go to school, like you're in business, people are in sales, like you can be revenue facing, you can work in technology, and you can demystify that I don't have to be this technical person that's over
Hmm.
here writing SQL or in the weeds, which love the SE and SA community, but there's ways that you can be involved and still make an impact. So that's really the things that drove me, just to say I want to have this connection. And in addition to that, there's like unique experiences that I may have as a Black woman. I think one I talked to about a mentee that I had, and she was like, at my company, they make us have our picture and our emails, and I sell in a specific area, and she was feeling as though that when she was reaching out to folks, that some people weren't as receptive to her.
Mm.
So that's like something that is unique that maybe uh, somebody from a different background wouldn't even think twice about. So sharing those experiences, how do I communicate? What's a better position for me? Things of that nature. So that's how it originally started. And since I was focused on the sales side of things, um, that group grew. Now that I'm on partnership side, that's actually the area that I'm kind of repivoting right now to kind of figure out just specifically like Black women in partnerships, because I still feel like um, there is a smaller group of us, and I want this to be an area that more people that look like me join in the future. But I think a really great organization right now who has done really well and took kind of the same philosophy and focus on a lot of like women in sales right now is a woman named Chantel. She runs Sisters in Sales.
Mm.
So I'll shout her out. And if anybody's interested in joining her organization, she's grown tremendously, has a summit every year, and is doing really, really great work. So always finding those folks within the community that you can kind of tap into and know that you can really grow and develop and not feel alone. You're not alone ever.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and I do think like partnerships as a role can be kind of a lonely position in a company as well, right? Like when no one understands what you're doing, and you're having to constantly justify the work and everything else, and finding your people and your community and everything else is so important. It's like to a much lesser extent, why we started Partnership Leaders as well. But just, yeah, an awesome initiative and effort there. Something really, really cool. And so
Yeah.
tell me, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your role at the moment, and like what you're kind of you've been there a little while, but you're also new enough still that you're probably still building. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your partner program there at Sigma and what it looks like and what you want it to look like.
No, I'm happy to speak to it. And I think kind of that what you just said really dovetails into why I was so excited to join Sigma. Like, there's been so much that has happened since I joined, but it is one of the most partner centric organizations that I have ever worked with, partnered with, ever. And so I think for me, like when you say a little bit of isolation, I feel like at Sigma, like we're almost like the champions. They look to us as like, this is the way that we do business and this is how you're successful. And that's the narrative that we continue to preach here. Um, Sigma Computing, we're an analytics tool in the modern data stack, really focus on ad hoc exploration. So, thinking about an interface that looks like Excel. So, no longer should data only be given to those data teams. And I know we all hit our head against the wall where we have something that we're trying to dig into and get more information about. And we have to go to our data team, and then they might not really understand what we're trying to communicate to them. And then we get a report back, and I try to drill down on it. And it's not the information that I want or need. And you have this kind of circle that you continue to go in. Sigma eliminates that. It's very business user friendly and enables you to drill down at cloud capacity. So we sit on top of data warehouses like Databricks, Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, to name a few, and continuing to grow. So those are some of our strategic partners. Um, as I mentioned, we're part of the modern data stack. If you see the evolution of that picture, it continues to grow and grow. But kind of the core components that we focus on are your ETL tools, your what we call our source partners, so any of those data warehouses that I just mentioned. And then kind of like downstream, you have your data lineage, data catalog partners. And I think an individual said it to me best. And this is when we were at one of our large partners conferences last year. And we're sitting on the expo hall. And it was very interesting for them to say and observe that every single company that's sponsoring this summit at this point in time does not work without another piece of software. We
Mm-hmm.
do not exist. We cannot function correctly without having partners. So we're all these little puzzle pieces that have to connect together in order to provide the extreme value that we promote to our customers. So that's why Sigma, in essence, has been an amazing experience because I look to my partners to say, you're already in this deal. In order for me to basically amplify your message and tell that entire story, like you need a front end. So it really makes sense for you to tell this comprehensive story than just like one segment of it. And so that's what our ecosystem has really been focused on is helping develop, build out, and amplify those messages across our partners to really have that cohesive message and say, end to end, here's what the best stack looks like for you in order to have an amazing experience and get the visualization, analytics, and that ad hoc experience at scale. So that's what I've been really excited about.
Amazing. And I got one question on that, and I could ask you a million questions about it, to be honest. But some of those partners that you mentioned are, they're big, they're heavyweights in the industry. Like, when you're in a role like that where you're partnering with really big companies that have their ecosystems already, and then also I think every company has the ambition to kind of develop their own ecosystem as well. Like, how do you balance, and like how do you think about the trade-off between like participating in someone else's ecosystem, kind of trying to create your own ecosystem? Like, is it counterproductive to even bother trying to create your own ecosystem when you could just participate in these like kind of large partner ecosystems that already exist? It's something that I'm constantly noodling on, and I'm really interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, like for instance, I'll name a couple of partners of ours. So like Fivetran is an ETL tool, and so is Matillion, they're a
Yeah.
partner, and then we have Databricks and Snowflake. Um, that combination could go multitude of ways. It could be Fivetran, Snowflake, Sigma. You can also throw a transformation layer in there like DBT. You can do Matillion. Snowflake, Sigma, Matillion, Databricks, Sigma. So when you say like participate in these large ecosystems, I think when I'm choosing partners or we're shortlisting, especially in the way things are moving forward about how I'm thinking about our FY24 planning, because our starts on February 1st, is like we're doing more with less. So what are
Yeah.
my right nows? What are my I can try to, and then what are my not needs right now? What I'm thinking about, are you a part of the Snowflake ecosystem? Are you a part of the Databricks
Yeah.
ecosystem? When I start branching out maybe two layers out, those are the folks that I'm more willing to connect with initially,
Hmm.
opposed to somebody that doesn't have that connection. Because what I want to do is, like I mentioned, is that comprehensive story. How are you already built in where their teams know who you are and can explain that value from end to end, because that makes it really easy for us to then communicate to our sales team. And as a former seller, you make things as easy as possible, as digestible as possible, and you tell the rep 20 times because no matter how many times you say it, you know, sometimes it takes a lot for it to actually stick. So that's how I kind of look at what's that next thing and how far out do we go and who do we kind of like target initially as those partners that make sense to work with the majority of the time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Um, well, I think that concept is going to keep on forming in our head, and I'll probably keep asking people that question, and at some point I might borrow what you just talked about for a general article or blog post or something on that, because I think it's a really interesting topic and something that most companies are having to navigate. So I know we're out of time, unfortunately, but I would love to ask you our final question, which is, could you share something that you learned recently that you think other people would be interested in finding out about?
Yeah, something that I recently just started to really digest is someone pointed me in a direction of a book called The 12-Week Year.
Mhm.
The book is really focused on the idea of not having these long, drawn out goals, but really focusing basically on a quarter basis and having your quarter plan, your monthly plan, weekly plan, and really thinking about that in a way so that you can execute. One of the core components of the book, they focus on the area of accountability. And this is something that I thought about for a long time about accountability. Like you need to hold other people accountable, and there's a consequence associated with it. But something that they highlight is like accountability is not like consequence, it's actually ownership. So something that I really have been doing in my day to day life is not trying to say hold people accountable, but more or less, how will they have ownership in this activity that I'm trying to drive? If I'm saying going into next quarter, I'd like to have more alignment across my sales leadership. How are we going to hold them accountable? It's like, how is this going to be maybe um, formed into like what their KPIs are. How many times are they interacting or setting up meetings with their peers at said partner? What can I do so that they themselves have ownership over that component? So it's not something I'm chasing people down or having to badger them, but kind of ingraining that into this is the benefit that you get from this particular activity or what I'm trying to formulate in front of you so that they themselves have that intrinsic motivation to go out and do those things instead of kind of the traditional way of me being like, I'm going to check in with you once a week and make sure you're doing your job. It's like, no, your job is to do this, and this is how we're successful. So, the same narrative that I said at the beginning, like here at Sigma, the way we position things when net new rep shows up at the door is the way you're successful here at Sigma is through partnerships. And then we walk them through the process of how they can do that. So that's something that I recently learned and kind of putting into practice. And seeing how I can improve my interactions as I make asks and have accountability.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I love that concept of kind of transfer of ownership. Like that's something I really believe in as like a key part of any successful partnership is like you can't just be following up with the partner all the time. You need to transfer the ownership and transfer so that they're holding themselves accountable, and you're creating like a framework for accountability between the partners. So I absolutely love that. You're speaking my love language at the moment. Yeah, it's amazing. So thank you so much for your time. This has been an amazing conversation. I know that people are going to be super fascinated with what you talked about, and really just deeply appreciate it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, for having me.